Many learners find themselves in the following situation. You can do all of the grammar exercises, you even seem to have a solid vocabulary, but it seems almost impossible to have a small talk, or maybe you can have a small talk, but you cannot really express complex ideas like the native speakers do. In other words, you're not fluent. You can't use the advanced grammar and you can't use the advanced vocabulary. You just seemingly try to fall back to using these simple words that are basically A2 or B1 at best. You pretty much have to think of every sentence that you formulate. So here's the reason why. Language learning is not a linear process. It's not about checking off the boxes. Like, for instance, okay, today I learned this grammar, I learned these words, and I think by the end of the year I should reach C1 level. Language learning is about building the connections between the elements that you have learned. So you have to be able to use them all simultaneously. It has to be like a net, like, you know, like a spider net, or like a web net. It has to all click, and this you do by actually implementing what you have learned, by practicing the language. In other words, you must speak, write, listen, and read. So when it comes to learning a new grammatical element, you should basically think of two phases. In the first phase, you just want to get an idea of what a grammatical element is. So you can do some grammar exercises, or you can practice with a tutor, so that you basically can understand what it's all about, how to use it, what is it for in general. However, after you understood the basic principles of the grammatical element, it's no longer useful to continue with the grammar exercises. Doing the grammar exercises will not necessarily lead to you being fluent. But please note that I am not saying that the grammar exercises are useless. No, they're very effective, they have their place, but they will not make you fluent. However, if you want to be able to use what you have learned, you have to take a different approach and move on to the second phase. Basically, in the second phase, you have to use this knowledge that you acquired, I mean all of the grammar, basically all the language knowledge that you have to use it in different contexts. So you have to talk about different topics which will allow you to build the relevant vocabulary. So you talk about medicine, you talk about tech, and you'll be forced to use these words. For instance, if you never practice asking questions, you're not gonna be good at it. You're basically used to only replying. So your tutor is basically asking you, okay, so how was your weekend? And you're like, yeah, it was nice, I did this and this. However, if you're not asking questions, you can't really expect to magically develop this ability. So you have to practice every ability that there is out there, basically. So this also includes like stating your opinion, for instance, or talking about past events, or like making a hypothesis of what may happen in the future. So all of that has to be practiced separately as well as together. Once again, we're building this net. Same goes for topics. If you only talk about video games, you shouldn't expect to have a sufficient vocabulary to talk about tech or medicine or environment. However, on the other hand, if you're primarily interested in developing this chit-chat skills, this may not be like as important, right? So you still should talk about different topics, but you shouldn't really like force yourself to talk about like the economy or something. Like if you're not planning to use it, you don't have to learn it, of course. But if you are an advanced learner, or if you need it for your job, then of course you will have to also introduce these topics. Bottom line is, the more variety you use, the more connections will be built in your brain, which will allow you to use more elements and more constructions, and this will inevitably lead to more fluency. Another very important aspect is that you generally shouldn't have this like passive role. So you might notice that your tutor will like try to kind of make you talk, right? He or she, right, will ask you questions and try to instigate some response. Right, that's all nice and good, but you also should interact with your tutor once again by asking questions, right? So it's not like an interrogation; it's more of a conversation. You also should try to consciously use the advanced grammar. So when you're talking, try to at least use a couple of new elements that you learned, because if you just stick to the stuff that is easy, that you learn, that you know well, then you'll not progress, of course. But don't, at the same time, don't put yourself under a lot of pressure, right? So at the end of the day, it's you should have some fun while learning, but also try to improve gradually. Another very important factor that plays a huge role when it comes to becoming fluent is reading and listening. So you might think like, well, how is listening gonna improve my speaking? It doesn't make any sense. Well, you're right to a certain degree, right? So it will not necessarily, so if you only read, you probably will not get as much as much better at speaking, but you'll still improve your vocabulary. You'll still improve your understanding of how a language is structured, because you'll see how the native speakers are using it. So you will see what is actually possible, what kind of structures are possible, because you're getting all this input. Similar to speaking, when it comes to listening and reading, you should also use different materials. So you should read anything from comic books to novels. Well, of course, it will depend on your current level of proficiency. And when it comes to listening, you should listen to songs, some podcasts, some videos, and so on and so forth. However, once again, at an early stage, you should not worry about this variety too much. Just focus on the text that interests you, so that you have the most amount of fun. Because if you don't, you will most likely not stick to it. And as soon as you reach a certain level of proficiency, you can switch to niche materials. Now we're gonna talk about learning vocabulary, which is kind of a controversial subject, because some may kind of say that you learn most of the vocabulary by actually, like using the language through, once again, reading, listening, speaking, and writing. That's true to a certain degree, but on the other hand, if you're not living in the country which language you're trying to learn, if you're not having this daily conversations with the native population for hours, then it might necessarily be the case for you, right? So you'll have to build up some base level vocabulary, especially if you're like at this beginner level, and if you're an advanced level as well, right? So if you're a beginner, you just have to build up this core vocabulary. So you have to learn basically the words that you tend to use the most, so in a normal conversation. So that's why you're always kind of noting your words in some textbook or something. As an advanced learner, you typically want to broaden your vocabulary, and I would just go for something like synonyms, like idioms, and so on and so forth. And also try to prioritize words that that you kind of like, maybe. Don't force yourself too much, but you have to learn some vocabulary. You have to gradually improve. And like if you're really dedicated, you can learn up to 10 words a day, right? So, but there are not too many people who are like that, but it's possible. However, if you just stick to it, if you just learn some words here and there, it will build up. And like for a normal conversation, you don't even have to have like a very, very immense vocabulary, like a spectacular vocabulary. You only need like maybe 2,000 words to have a chit chat. That will be enough. After you reach a certain level of fluency, you'll find yourself not making any progress yet again. So you might be able to have a like chit-chat type of conversation with your friends, but you can't really explain complex ideas. You can't really explain something that is kind of outside of a normal day-to-day conversation. You might ask yourself, so what am I doing wrong? And so you're not doing anything wrong, but there is another aspect that you probably want to focus on, which is writing. Just imagine a person who never went to school and has never written a single essay in their life. It's probably gonna be like at a very basic small talk level once again. So when you write, you're forced to avoid rather repetitions. You have to use the advanced grammar because it's written language. You're trying to stay kind of compact. You're trying to avoid writing a lot. So you can't really use your how do you call it? You can't really use your hands to show how something works. So you're basically forced to use the advanced stuff, which is very good, the advanced vocabulary and the advanced grammar. And after a while, this will build up and you'll develop more connections that I refer to so much. And this will translate into speaking as well. So your writing skills will translate into speaking if you do this long enough. But you have to speak and write. So you shouldn't really stick to one activity. So if you learn something while writing, then you automatically want to kind of implement this in speaking as well. However, if you only stick to writing, you'll most likely not make this transition once again. I would recommend you starting with writing simple summaries, and then gradually you can move on to writing essays like reviews and any other text. Basically, practicing presentations is like it's like a symbiosis of speaking and writing. Basically, when you have a presentation, you have to write your thoughts down. Typically, you have to write down the formulation, like you have like a really strict plan of what you're saying, and then you're gonna actually like implement this in a speech. So you're like presenting it, and then like another very cool thing would be to have a discussion afterwards. So you reinforce those elements once again. You have to always be honest with yourself in terms of what your goal is. If you only want to have like a small talk, you can just stick to some reading, some listening, speaking a couple of times a week, some grammar exercises here and there, and basically that's all you're gonna need pretty much. So you're not gonna need a lot of writing if you're only interested in developing small talk slash comprehension skills. But if you're an advanced learner and you want to like develop some really impressive skills, then you probably want to include, well, not probably, you'll definitely have to include some writing, and you will have to expand your vocabulary as well. So let's just summarize what you have learned today. There are 4 major channels of language learning: speaking, writing, listening, and reading. All four of them are extremely important. However, beginners should primarily focus on reading, listening, and speaking. If you're an advanced learner, you should definitely include some writing as well. Grammar exercises are very useful and important. However, if you want to become fluent, it's not about grammar exercises. It's more about building connections between the elements that you learned by actually practicing the language. Variety is another very important element, so you have to use as many topics as you can, as many contexts, basically as much variety as you can, and this will like reinforce this something that I call web, right? This net, this dots. It will reinforce these connections even more if you use more variety. You most likely should not disregard learning new vocabulary unless you have a lot of contact to the native population of the language that you're learning. You will also need a structured plan of where you're going, so that's maybe the time when you have to look into hiring a tutor who will give you like a decent plan, who will show you like we have to first do this, then we do that. This is important for the advanced learners. This grammar you don't really need at this moment, then he or she can also teach you this grammar, give you some relevant tips, and basically make your life easier. And last but not least, you should always try to have fun when you learn a new language, because this is pretty much the only way to stay consistent. Don't force yourself, right? Don't be too hard on yourself, and take your time, right? Also quite important. And because if you're not living in the country, let's just be honest, you probably will not be as motivated, typically at least. But if you stick to it, right, after a while, after a couple of months, after maybe 6 months, maybe more, maybe less, you will build up some decent base level skills. So if that's something you're interested in, then awesome. But once again, you only gonna progress like a lot if you actually have contact to the native speakers on a daily basis. Because if you don't, then we kind of have to simulate, right, in the lesson. Yeah, I will tell you, okay, read this, okay, listen to this, okay, let's talk about this. But okay, you do this for a while, but then you'll go back to your normal life, or you talk in your mother language, and then okay, it kind of goes out the window, and then we see each other in 3 days or something. So I hope it was interesting for you. You have learned something new, and I will be looking forward to you in the next video.